Hello, everyone. Today we wanted to do something a little bit different. We wanted to have a brief or basic workshop on what we consider one of the main issues or main challenges facing many companies when they're talking about asset management and maintenance. And this is based off of many surveys that we performed during the past couple of weeks on LinkedIn. And essentially, we found that one of the main culprits for outages and maintenance issues is unplanned outages and equipment availability, right? So with that, we decided to do a quick workshop on one of the basic things that we need to do, and sometimes we don't recur to that from the get-go, and it would be something that saves a lot of money and could save a lot of time if performed frequently. So with me today is Luis Echevarria, and he is the expert who will be presenting the workshop today. So Luis, take it away.
All right, thanks, Ernesto. So our workshop today, we are focusing on reducing unplanned outages and increasing equipment availability through a very basic, simple methodology, right? In terms of how to manage your work order backlog, okay? So, the agenda for today, we're going to discuss a little bit more about that challenge, discuss about data layout, data analysis, actionable items, and what would be our expected results, okay? So the main challenge is how to reduce unplanned outages, right? And it's a mix of things, right? So we're focusing on the simple things that we can do to address those unplanned outages, right? Or at least try to be on top of them, right? And be able to develop new strategies in order to reduce those unplanned outages. Okay. Uh, so we're gonna see a bit more now in terms of data layout to understand the columns, right? So we're gonna be looking at equipment classification, description, dates, type of work, right, and priority. So with that, we're gonna move to our Excel, okay? And we're focusing on an Excel because of the way that there are different types of systems where that one can use to manage work, right? So for example, we can manage work to a simple Excel sheet. We can have more dynamic or more complex systems such as enterprise asset management systems, and there's a bunch of them in the industry that can be used to achieve these. But today we're going to start with the data, right? With basically an Excel that we can populate with the information related to it and kind of uh, try to assess what are our problems, what are our ways to handle those type of problems, and the different methods that can be developed in terms of strategies. Okay, so right now we're showing you an Excel sheet. It has several columns. Some are blank, some are more have populated some data in it. And like we said on the data layout, we have, for example, columns such as work orders. We have columns indicating the equipment, and more on the equipment, it's the actual coding, right? To identify that equipment. We have the equipment type, so we can have system assets, locations, right? All of the things that we can do work against it, okay? We have our uh, description of the type of work, right? Which is basically defining what is our problem for that end. We have other columns that are more interesting in the different type of information that they can bring to us, right? So we're looking at criticality, right? We are looking at how our equipment and the criticality of that equipment can help us identify how is our backlog, understand where we should put our resources to work on those work orders, and basically try to manage it and stay on top of it, okay? So we have criticality, we have description of that criticality, we have priorities, right? Because within our work, we can have different types of priorities within the system, okay? We have our status of our work order, when that work order was reported, right? The type of work order, right? So for example, breakdown, we have facilities, we can have preventive maintenance, we can have a lot of information here in terms of the different type of work that we can be addressing during this exercise, okay? And then we have additional columns over here that we have them for a reason, and we're gonna get to those, right? Once we kind of start working with our data, right? So our first step is try to take our data and try to, uh, let's say, group it, filter it out, make sure that we have our things that we want to work with, okay? So looking at our data over here, we're gonna do simple process over here where we're gonna be sorting our information. And we're gonna be sorting that out by our type of equipment, or sorry, type of job, right? In this case, we're gonna be also, once we have it filtered out, we're gonna be looking at the criticality of the equipment, okay? And then we're gonna be also looking at the priority of that equipment. And finally, we're gonna be also looking at classification of that work order. And why is that? Because once we put this in perspective, we're gonna be looking at what is our work, what is it that we need to focus on, what is it that we need to take out of the system, right? In order to make sure that we are working with our main problem, okay? So once we have that filtered out, we're gonna see that we have our breakdowns, we have facilities, we have the different priorities of those work orders, right? And the current status, right? If we look at our status, we have status such as release, meaning that we have status currently being addressed at the moment. We have status on hold, indicating that for some reason there might be either resources problem, there might be, we might be waiting for parts to address those issues, or simply we have to wait until an outage, a bigger outage, in order to work on those, okay? So you have those status over here, you have your classification, right? Which indicates what is it that we want to focus on. So let's look at our data. And the first thing that we're gonna be doing is, since we're looking at outages, right? And typically outages will come from the the moment of an actual breakdown coming on, right? So let's look at our data and segregate it, right? Let's filter that out and let's eliminate um, calibration, because we're not going to be calibrating nothing on that end. We are looking at preventive maintenance. We have taking this out, right? So we're going to focus with what is our main cause of those unplanned outages, okay? So we're looking at breakdowns. Typically, It can be corrective work. In some scenarios, they use corrective maintenance. Other people use breakdown. There's different ways that you can identify what type of work are we looking at that point. Okay. Okay. So based on that, we are kind of looking at our breakdown over here, and then we're going to be focusing not only on our work, but we're going to focusing on those work orders related to equipment that might be repetitive, right? That for some reason we're seeing a frequency of breakdowns coming in and out as time passes on. Okay. So looking at that, I'm gonna be looking at our work over here, and if I look closely over here, I can identify three different work orders, right? Where we are seeing an actual equipment called PMP-001, an asset that has electrical issues, right? If I see over here, then I'm looking at it has a high criticality. If you see that one that we are highlighting over here, okay, it has a priority 3. So even if it's high, still it has some type of priority in there, right? And we can see different types of priority, right? So if I go over here, we have safety priority, priorities 1, 2, and 3, and so on, right? If we look and let's add those preventive and calibrations over here as well, you're gonna see that we can have other types of priority in the system, right? So we are focusing on an actual equipment that it's critical for the operation, and its priority, it's kind of in the mid levels, right? It's not priority 1, but it's within that range, right? As you see it over here. Okay. So going back over here, let me just eliminate this guy over here so that we can focus on those. So looking at these three guys over here, these three work orders, we're gonna start to also filter out additional information. Okay, so let's look at those specific equipment that we're seeing. And we're looking for equipment PMP -001. See over here, right? So, right? Now, if I look over here, and if I'm doing this, let's say the normal way, I'm going to be focusing on my work order that it's currently on that release status. Okay. If you see over here, there's a couple things more that we have to dig a bit better, right? For example, previous two work orders that you see over here, they are currently in the status completed. Okay, they're still high. If you see the description of the problem, we're looking at electrical issue, machine installation stuff, inconsistently working. There is a problem with the control panel, right? So all of these problems arising for that specific asset, we can see a history, something that is kind of repetitive, right? In a way that we can identify what can I be doing a bit different on my strategy for maintenance for this specific equipment based on this information that we're seeing right now over here, right? Uh, if you look closely at the day reported, basically the date where they actually raised that work order in my Excel system, we have something that it's happening almost on a monthly basis, right? We have over here August 20th, September 20th, and then October 25, which is the latest one and still kind of open, right? So we have to make sure that our PM strategy Well, first, we have to make sure that if this asset, right, in this case, PMP-001, has an actual PM associated to it. If not, then our first step will be to kind of look into that, right? Make sure that if it's kind of repetitive on that end, then probably creating a PM would be uh, beneficial for the company, as we want to make sure that this critical asset, it's operating efficiently, it's operating most of the time uh, on the normal our operations, right? We want to make sure that our equipment's available, because if not, we're gonna be on downtime, and basically it's gonna be affecting us about it. Okay. So a couple things that we can also look into that, right? And basically, it would be uh, what would be our resolution if we decide to generate a PM, right? A preventive maintenance for this asset to make sure that it's we can do something and uh, try to make sure that this breakdown doesn't occur continuously as we're seeing. Okay, so our first attempt would be kind of do a PM, and also we have to make sure that on that PM, uh, we have to decide what will be our frequency for that PM. Okay, so if we look over here, we have to decide what will be our frequency. And if we look closely at those they reported, we have kind of on a monthly basis, something is happening with that uh, equipment itself, right? So probably if we do a 3-week PM, that can probably uh, give us some time before to inspect that equipment, make sure that everything's aligned and everything's working correctly on it. Okay. The other area that we have to make sure that we have to kind of include on our strategy is what is it that we want to inspect? Because we need to make sure that what we are inspecting and making sure that it's uh, working correctly, we have to make sure that it's kind of part of that PM that we are developing for that equipment. Okay. So that is one point that we have to also put in mind. How to get to that on what to inspect. Then we have these fields over here, right? That we can kind of assess what is happening with each of them, right? So we have over here our closing codes. We have a problem code, we have a failure code, we have a cost code, and we have an action code. Okay. And what we want to do is try to make sure that we capture how the equipment is failing, right? So probably if we look at this over here, we have electrical problem found in control panel, consistently working, right? Machine suddenly shuts off. Well, let's say that once they did the whole corrective work on that equipment, they came up with a different scenario of what happened to that specific equipment itself. So let's say that our problem code was an electrical issue, right? Our failure, it might be related to a loose wiring, right? That can be one our fails, right, for that specific equipment. Since, for example, electrical problem on the control panel, so probably the control panel was not working or was not displaying the correct information as it was operating. Okay, and then our cause might have been the equipment vibration. So that equipment vibration causes that loose wiring, and basically we see it on the equipment as an electrical issue, right? and basically our action code, right? So we can have different ways that we can action an item over here. We can say that probably it might be needing adjustment, right? Or it might be needing a replacement, right? And this will be based on how many times this type of problem is occurring in the in that specific equipment, right? So probably at the beginning, we might have seen that on these two work orders that we see over here, probably an adjustment might do the case, right? And might basically uh, correct the issue, right? But then if it happens again, then probably we will probably adjust it again just to make sure that everything's aligned on that end. But probably the third time, now that we're seeing that it's kind of behaving uh, all the time correctly like that, then probably a replacement around that wiring or around that vibration control might be our solution to either permanently correct the issue or at least maintain it before it's happening again. Okay, so we have different ways that we can deal with that specific uh, issue itself, right? And the idea over here that we have these fields is be able to assess, be able to make sure not only the ones that we are dealing in terms of our backlog, but looking at the history of it and making sure that we capture what is happening to them. Okay.
So, Luis, I do have a kind of a
Mm-hmm.
question here regarding. So this is all nice when we have a particular example or an equipment that we want to assess. But
Mm-hmm.
when we have the bulk data, which is typically the case, we have a big list, we have everything there. How do we go about trying to narrow down the list and somehow group them and make sure that we can focus on what matters first and then go down to the minor
Right.
issues.
Right. So in that case, we have to focus on criticality of those equipments, right? And basically the priority that's been set. Now, in the priority, if it's a manual thing that typically companies have to address what is a priority of a work order, then it might be a little bit subjective in a way that it might be my judgment, right, to identify what type of priority, right? But if we are able to gather different data from different places and kind of come up with a solution where we can mix results from those criticality and those priorities in the system, probably we can come up with a kind of a matrix that help us identify within our priority what might be my highest priority, right? So we can use those measurements and say, well, if I have my priority criticality over here, I have my priority over there, and then I have my type of job, right? If it's a breakdown, then probably I can quantify that. Probably I can come up with a value and place it over my calculated priority, okay? And let's say that at some point, because of the type of job that we're seeing, this might have been close to 100, for example, right? And 100 meaning highest priority of all, right? Or highest priority within that uh, P3 priority that we see over here, okay? So our main methodology to use would be to start filter out based on equipment criticality. So we need to make sure that we have that in place on our uh, management system of work orders, right? And we can also use or include their priorities as well, right? And type of work that needs to happen. I think using those three things, probably we can come up with a methodology that uh, can give us some statistics, right? Some values that we can use to filter out from the whole list that we see over here, what would be our highest priority over there. Okay. Does that answer your question, Ernesto?
Yeah, so I guess to recap, so you would say first go with criticality, then follow with whatever the order would be on priorities,
Mhm.
and take into account things like the work order type, um, just to
Yes.
remove preventive or something like that. That it's a kind of a frequency based maintenance instead
Yeah.
of just having things that are corrective work orders that happen because something is wrong at that point.
Yeah, because typically they might be that your PMs are kind of being done, or more inspections and are being done with the equipment currently running, right? So it doesn't affect you as an outage. There might be PMs that you typically might need to be offline in order to do them. But let's say in the instance that you have a PM that it's kind of inspecting the equipment itself, then probably you don't, it cannot be categorized as an outage because you don't have to have it offline the equipment in order to execute the PM for that specific equipment.
Right. Another interesting point here is the cost code being equipment vibration, right? That could go back to a problem code not necessarily being an electrical issue, but something like a bad bearing or something like that.
Mhm.
In that case, how do you kind of assess it and understand that, well, this may be an electrical issue on the surface, but on the root cause, then this could be more on the mechanical side. How do you go about that?
You have to look into the actual history of that asset. So we have to go back, we have to go further and probably bring out all the data related to that PM, right? To go through it, right? To make sure that what we're seeing, what was happening is something that it's kind of been trending on, right? We're seeing that as a something that is happening, right? And probably at some point we might need to bring in either the OEM or a person who's selling that part just to make sure that there are no defects, right? No manufacturing defects on that item itself. Because probably if that was the case, then probably either you might need to redesign or replace uh, the whole part, right, with a newer version of that specific
Right.
item. So that I think that's the initially you can see that it can be repaired several ways, right? But I think what it's important is looking from your list, looking at your high criticality equipment, and then looking at the history of those, right? To make sure that you know what is happening with them, that it's something brand new, it's not repetitive. Because if that was the case, then probably you're going to see that up and running from there, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and in this example, it's pretty clear that, well, it happened once, let's fix it. It happens twice, let's fix it. But then let's look at it a little bit more into why that's happening. And we don't necessarily need a PM, but we could perhaps do a replacement on the part and understand, well, this is
Yeah.
not really an issue that needs to happen again. We could add it as a checklist item on a PM schedule that's already in place, but
Mhm.
that's something that's not expected to happen every month, right? So
Correct.
something was wrong and we fixed it. We'll keep an eye on it, but it should be fixed with the replacement that was done on the third time.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
So that is basically how we could deal with our uh, simple steps, right, in order to deal. But probably, if you look over here, you probably need to make sure that you are including as part of your assessment, right? have to include information related to the equipment. So you have to bring that data into the Excel. You have to bring out the priority of that. You have to bring out you probably need a library of problem codes, failure codes, cost codes, action codes, in order to bring it into the mix and make sure that you are assessing and capturing all that data when you're doing your analysis. So at the end, you know exactly what is it that I need to inspect on my PM over this frequency of time. Okay. Questions you may have?
So to the participants here, you are free to ask any questions. You can unmute yourself or write a question on the chat. The idea is to have a conversation, not necessarily wait until the end, because I know these questions might be very particular to the example that we're looking at this point. So if you have any questions regarding this, then
Yeah.
definitely feel free to ask.
Okay. So typically we're handling this through an actual Excel, right? And people do use them to manage their maintenance. There are other people that use it a bit different, right? And basically they are looking at something such as, let me see if I can escape this over here, right? And probably they have an enterprise asset management system that can mm, do the work for them, right? In a sense, right? If I go over here and try to look for that asset specifically that we just saw in that Excel. So I'm gonna look for PMP 001, see if that brings out our pump over here. Okay, so we have our information. If you see over here, we already have that criticality set for that equipment. We have manufacturing information. And the good thing about this over here is that once identified as a critical asset, right, then you can have a place where you can see what's the history of that uh, equipment, right? If you see over here and we scroll a little bit to the right, then we already have our problem codes and failure codes, which makes it easier to handle the data, right? To manage it better, right? To identify issues as they are coming on. If you see right here, it has code, but let's look at this one specifically, this 76,518, right? Looking at that specific work order, it's gonna bring out my information, right? It's gonna bring out what is it that is happening over there, right? So we have priorities, we have our problem codes, right? So if I look over here, it has information related to that, right? If I go into my closing codes over here, then I can also have my whole listing of failure codes, of closing, of cost codes and action codes as well, okay? So it's important to make sure that, yes, you can do the whole thing through your Excel, you can manage it, but as time passes on, we've seen that those backlogs continue to increase a bit and a bit more, right? So at some point, handling that massive data can be a challenge, right? So moving into an actual EAM system can help you do this fairly quick, right? And we can come up with different ways that it can be automated, right? So for example, we mentioned about over here, have that calculated priority, have a calculation between that criticality, that priority, and that type of job needed, right? So typically these systems over here can have that built into it, right? And can have that automatically calculated for you. So once you look at all your work orders in the listing, you can start looking at what are my priorities And within that priority, what is my top priority, right? Using that automated part of the calculation for the priority, okay? And that is one example. There are many other ways that you can deal with this. But again, the main thing is help you go and stay on top of that data, stay on top of those problems so that you can definitely and make sure that you can adjust your PM strategy. You can create your PMs. You know exactly what is it that you need to capture on those PMs in order to uh, review and make sure that you are making sure that that equipment is currently operating, it's available to operate, and it's producing what it needs to be producing at that point.
Luis, so there are many industries that are very focused on having things like a specific and standard KPIs that may be used to understand what's the performance on assets and how are they doing things like mean time to repair, mean time between failures, and all that.
Mhm.
Is there any way having this information can translate to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing is that for example, mean time between failure, uh, for that to work, right? For that to give you some data back, some feedback of what is happening to your assets, you typically need to have a closing library in there. You need to use this because that's how the system can tell you, hey, this type of equipment it's failing this way. And when I say this type of equipment is because, for instance, I have over here a pump, right? But I can have 10, 20, 30 pumps working, right? And I don't want to make sure what's happening with this one. I want to make sure what's happening with my rest of populations of similar pumps and how they are behaving. So typically having that closing codes over there to assess how things are failing, with that you can produce, for example, reports such as mean time between failures, in which the system, in the way that when it's been reported that work order or close, it can calculate for you what are your mean time between one failure and the other one, right? And that can help you identify in your PM strategy what will be my frequency to deal with this type of equipment.
Right. So there are features that allow you to have these metrics at hand at any point, right?
Correct, correct. And this kind of things not typically you're not gonna have them on a Excel system. Probably you might need something a little bit more robust so that it can give you that information automatically, right? And things that you can on a weekly basis uh, have those exported out, right? And at your hand, right, to be analyzed without having to pass all that all the work in order to get to the point of identifying this is my problem. What can I do for that? Okay.
Okay.
Right. So going back over here, our slideshow. So we need to understand our columns. We need to understand our data. We need to make sure that we are able to classify, filter, group our data in such a way that can bring out what is my critical things and we need to be on top, okay? So on our data analysis, practically we group our work orders, we sort it out by criticality and by priorities, and then we group by the class itself. And then from there, we took out our preventive maintenance work because typically, or mostly, not every time, but mostly it might be uh, they're not causing you outages, right? In a sense. So actionable items based on that, then we can revise our PM strategy for our equipment. Uh, with that, we can analyze top recurring events, either by equipment or equipment class, right? You can have within one class, such as we saw the pump, we can have 10, 20 equipment related to it, right? So we can address them all at once within what 1 PM strategy, okay? We need definitely a library of standard failure codes, right? To include the problem, the failure, the cause, and the action codes. That way we can improve how we can classify our work orders. We probably can go and revise our equipment criticality as we need, based on how is our operation changing, right? And one thing that we can definitely use at some point when you have an enterprise asset management system is automate work order priority, because that way it's a little bit more scientific, it's a little bit more statistical in a sense, and not necessarily based on the judgment of a person, right? That can be not that different, but it can have its differences from person to person. Okay, so with that, we expect that we can increase our equipment availability, reduce our unplanned maintenance, be more preventive, right, than corrective. So we want to make sure that that ratio it's higher on that end, and that will kind of increase our equipment reliability as well, right? If we are addressing situations before they actually happen, then we are maintaining availability and we're also making them a bit more reliable in a sense. And then with that, we can track with all that is happening, that life cycle of an asset, okay? Which is, in these cases, very important to keep track of, right? Not only what is happening, but what happened before, because it's going to tell you a story. It's going to tell you when happened, what is it that I did to correct it, and should I keep doing the same thing, or should I be moving to something else to correct the problem?